Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks for making some time to be with us. Let's get this show on the road and walk you through a more engaging lead nurture campaign. So just some housekeeping to get started. As you will be familiar, if you attend regularly, you'll know we use Zoom to record and host our webinars. And replays are always available on our blog within a week or so following the user group. Questions, of course, we love questions. We have a few questions submitted actually this month before the webinar, so thank you for those. And but please use the Q&A function throughout the course of the webinar to ask any questions. Just be aware that they're visible to all attendees. Okay, so if someone asks the same question, you can go ahead and actually vote up their question if you like. If you wanted to ask a private question, feel free to use the chat function, and one of our team will be able to respond to you. So our team is myself, Derek Bell, I'm your host, joining you today, and Adrian Jones, our CEO, is also on the line, and we'll be able to answer some questions. All right, so what's our plan for the next 45 minutes? So we do have a couple of questions that have been submitted. And I think they're probably relevant questions for everybody. So thank you to Danny and Maria who submitted those. We're then going to take a dive quickly into, first of all, defining lead nurturing specifically, just so we can kind of all be on the same page in relation to what we're looking to cover today. Now, the lead nurture experience that you deliver is pretty critical, and obviously your content plays a big part in that, but so does the campaign canvas. And so we'll look at that. The other question that often comes up when we talk to clients about this is, where do I start? I've got 100,000 people sitting in my database, and every year I'm adding another 5 to 10,000 people to my database. How do I start? Who should be in the lead nurturing campaign? So we'll address that as well and give you some tips and ideas. And then test and improve is a really important process, or optimization is a term that you may be more familiar with. So we want to make sure we get that covered as well. And the Q&A we'll do at the end, but as I said, please ask questions throughout. Don't feel like you need to wait till the end. So let's dive in and have a look at some of the questions. So Danny is from the US and will be attending our user group session there later in the week. And but again, I thought it would be relevant to share that with our Asia Pacific audience as well. So he's been using Eloqua for quite a while, but lead nurture specifically is not something that he's had to do. So hopefully today's session will be able to help in that area. Now, beyond the webinar today, in relation to other resources, there really are a good number of them. The challenge that I've always found over the years is finding good B2B or more high value type of content that talks to lead nurture. So we'll help you with that. And I think what did I say here? I think I said to Danny that hopefully the webinar will serve as an indicator or some information to help give him some shape to what he needs to do. But please also make sure you visit our blog. There's mountains of content there, and if you use the search function and type lead nurture, you'll have a whole bounty of information there to sort of start getting a good view of a more B2B and high value type of nurture campaign. So hopefully that will help Danny. The other one comes from Maria. Maria's in New Zealand and is a digital and content manager. Now, let me just check to see if Maria is with us today. Not yet, it seems. That's okay. So her question, again, I thought was a good question for everybody. So what advice do you have for organizations that need to build a nurture campaign for a single event, but the post-event nurture needs to nurture leads for multiple business units? How do you deal with that complexity? And I said, well, first thing, Maria, you've got the right platform, because managing that complexity is a core part of what Eloqua is able to do for you. Taking a step back, your question was, what advice do you have? I kind of dived straight into solution mode, but took a step back and hang on, you asked what advice do we have? Okay, so the advice that we would have is that, first of all, you want to gather the data you need as soon as possible, because one of the key things that jumped out to me in your question was after the event, you've got 10 business units, and I assume by the point that you made that you obviously want to tailor those communications for the 10 business units. That makes perfect sense. But if you're going to do that, you need the data. So you need to ask the question as early as possible in the process. Now, an event is kind of a cool opportunity to make sure you get the responses to the questions that you need as you ask people to register for the event. It could be based on a primary interest. It's not my role to disclose to everybody where you're from. I made the commitment in the document you filled in to submit the form that I wouldn't do that. But I understand the 10 business units, right? So at this event, as you're registering people for the event, I think one of the key questions you're probably going to want to ask is what their primary interest is in your world, so that you can then tailor responses. Now, of course, you want to be flexible because that audience that you're talking to, they may well change their mind from the day that they register to attend your event. They may well change their mind, or coming to the event itself may well change their mind again. So we need to be flexible and to be able to cater for that and provide avenues and ways for people to give you the most up-to-date opinion or express preference that they've got. So dynamic content plays a critical role in delivering all of this information for you. The advice I would give you, though, is to take a step back and have a think through, because of all those 10 business units, would you in fact be delivering identical messaging? Obviously not. Obviously not. Would it be the identical number of communications potentially going through each stream? If it is, dynamic content may well be the way, but if it was me, I'd possibly lean towards having multiple canvases, because I would want to be able to tailor them using other aspects, not just content. It could be the frequency. It could be that one business unit, people need to make a decision much earlier than in another business unit. And so you don't want to rush the comms out the door to then have this huge gap between when they need to make a decision. But if there's a longer buying decision for a different business unit, well, then you want to tailor your comms to suit. We'll talk more about that as we go through the session today. But so that would be my advice to you. I hope that that is helpful. All right. So before we begin, I just wanted to get some clarity around what we're actually doing and what we're actually trying to cover today, because it's a huge topic and we've got 45 minutes to kind of get through it. So what is it we're trying to do? So what is your objective and what is it that you're trying to achieve? And we kind of brainstormed and came up with a range of different objectives that you might have. And these are potentially just some of them, right? So is it to reach marketing KPIs? Maybe you want to accelerate leads through their buyer's journey. That makes the assumption to a degree that you've got that buyer's journey mapped out and it's clear to you what that buying journey is. Do you want to deliver MQLs to the organization? And I say that because sometimes they go to sales, sometimes they go to a call center, sometimes they go to service. There can be a whole range of people they go to, but underlying point being that you want to deliver marketing qualified leads to the organization. Obviously, supporting sales to try and hit their target. Sales and marketing unification is a goal and objective that we should all be working towards. And so obviously marketing, delivering those marketing qualified leads to help the sales team hit their sales target is kind of key. And there's the unification point. So more than just marketing alignment or sales and marketing alignment, sales and marketing unification is more. And you'll find some stuff on our blog about that, but we'll talk more about that in the months to come. To maintain engagement with your leads. Now, this one might... Okay, let's take, if you think about a prospective university student, great example, right? So, we start talking to kids it depends on the school and the parents, but let's say it's around year 9 or 10. Okay, start year 11, it starts to get pretty serious, and year 12, we're getting very serious. And so that's quite an extensive buyer's journey if we look at it like that, right? It's at the end of the day, it is a buyer's journey, and it's a long one. Okay, so devising a nurture campaign that goes for 2 months for these kids that potentially they've got 3 or 4 years to make a decision, it's kind of almost like a moot point, right? It's like a flash in the pan. We'll talk more about some other types of buyer journeys and the reasons that it's good to understand that time frame, because that will help you balance out the types of comms and the frequency of your comms as well. So maintaining engagement, you don't want to have a peak and then just nothing. You want to make sure you stick with them until you know they've actually transacted and become a customer. Are you trying to increase conversion? So you've done some analysis and you're looking at your campaigns and you're seeing conversion, etc. But are you in fact hitting the mark and getting the conversion that you need? So maybe that's an objective. And finally, are you using lead score to push more leads to the call center? That could be another way you want to do, another objective of your lead nurture campaign. And by the way, you can answer yes to multiples of these. There's not a binary story we're trying to tell here. It may well be that they're all of your objectives, and that may be okay, but we probably want to trim it back a little bit. Okay, so then the next big question is, who are you nurturing? So I thought of coming at this from a scenario point of view, and that you've just come out of a meeting with the business. There's probably sales and C-level executives in the room, and this is the task that you've been given to build and automate a new lead nurture campaign. And I would suggest to you that there are a range of questions that you need to go through in order to make sure it's real, first of all, and that it can be built. So one of the fundamental questions is, who are we nurturing? So in the course of today, what we want to focus on is lead nurture. And I mean that very specifically in that a lead is somebody who has not yet purchased from your organization. If they've purchased already and they are a customer and you're trying to cross-sell, well, that's a cross-sell campaign. It's not a lead nurture campaign, okay? So cross-sell is a separate exercise. That's not what we're covering today. Should the nurture match the buyer's journey from a time frame point of view? That's the critical one I was talking about, right? Do you have sufficient content to make that journey engaging? That's a really critical one, because you can get very excited about what it is you're trying to deliver, but at the same time, you need to map out and think about the content that you're going to be delivering. So is there enough content? Will there be a mix of gated and non-gated content? And that's probably more of a strategic question than anything else. The benefit, obviously, with gated content is you get to ask questions and you get to ask profile questions. You don't need to submit people or present people with 10 or 15 questions in order to access the content. It could be really simple: first name, last name, and a question. Obviously, their email address and a question. And hopefully in the course of the campaign over time, you get to present multiple questions to people. The other key underlying thing when it comes to looking at questions on forms is, what is the data that you need? What has been agreed between sales and marketing that constitutes a marketing qualified lead? Is there clarity in the organization on that particular point? Often much easier on the marketing side, because we're data oriented and we're very clear on what information we have and what information we don't have. And obviously progressive profiling with your Eloqua forms is another ideal way to do this, which means you really want to be using your Eloqua landing pages and Eloqua forms versus pushing people to the website. Because once you push people to the website, you, to a degree, lose control. Okay, so your Eloqua landing pages and forms are really designed to help you maintain that control and present people with the right sort of questions in order to develop a marketing qualified lead. Yeah. So what is a lead nurture campaign? Let's dive in. And I thought it might be easier to start with what it's not. Okay, so the term nurture gets thrown around a lot, and we use it to describe 2 emails going out the door or 3 emails going out the door. And I'd argue that that's not really a nurture campaign. A lead nurture campaign typically is quite a bit more than just that. Okay, but if we're pushing out emails with non-personalized content, that's probably really not a lead nurture campaign. An autoresponder following a form submission, that's definitely not a lead nurture campaign. Okay. A campaign that hits contacts with a huge number of emails, one after the other, with no consideration of where they are in the buying journey, their engagement with you, their downloading of content, their website visits, all of that sort of information. If none of that is taken into consideration, then it's not really a lead nurture campaign. Okay. It's just, well, spam potentially, but we all hate to use that term, right? The key thing that you're trying to do is to develop and refine relationships. Okay. And you want to be able to try and, as early as possible, work out who the decision maker is. And is there a time frame with that decision that needs to be made in relation to the purchase that they're hopefully making with you? So Eloqua can really help you in a whole range of ways to do this. And the campaign canvas is one of the key ways that we do that, but also looking at the underlying data that you have about the person that can tell you things about their intent, about their interests, etc., all of that sort of stuff. Now, the very principles of lead nurture that we're going to cover today can certainly be applied to both pre-sale and post-sale, and the concept of onboarding campaigns. From a mechanical point of view, kind of really follows along the same principles that we'll be looking at today when we look at the campaign canvas. So these are good skills to have because they're definitely transferable. But I just really wanted to focus our attention today on lead nurturing in a pre-sale and an always-on campaign. What do we mean by always on? Exactly that, I suppose. But lead nurturing, here's the definition that we kind of came up with. So lead nurturing is a strategic marketing practice that uses data and targeted content to develop relationships and guide potential customers, that is leads, through their buying journey, ultimately aiming to convert them into paying customers. And a lead nurture campaign, importantly, is always on. It's not a campaign that you start and have a fixed group of people go through and then it finishes. A lead nurture campaign is always on, and it's always listening for the right people to drop into that nurture campaign. Okay, that's one of the fundamental differences. So if we look at it from a customer lifecycle or buyer journey point of view, this is the infinity loop from Oracle that they use. And there are many examples of these, but I kind of like this one. So our focus really is steps 1 through 3. So the need, the research, and the selecting of a product or service is really what we're doing. And we may well push into step 4 being the purchase point. Okay, and then we know that marketing is definitely reaching further and further into the customer life cycle, and certainly further down the funnel is another expression that's used. And so depending on the nature of what you do, you may reach a little bit further in to that customer life cycle. Sorry, and there's the other bits and pieces in that loop. So step 5, to use the product or service, they receive it, maintain it. So think of maintenance and service contracts and all those sorts of different things, ongoing learning, those sorts of things. And then hopefully they get to a point where they recommend what you do and become an advocate for what you do. And then the cycle kind of continues again. Okay, so one definition amongst many, what is lead nurturing? So it's a targeted approach and anticipates the specific requirements of each prospect, leveraging insights into their background, i.e. title, industry, role, and stage within the buyer's journey. You'd be surprised how hard it can be sometimes when I've sat with customers and asked the question, who are you nurturing? And it's like, everybody in the database? I'm like, no, that's generally not the right answer. But you can only nurture really based on the data that you have available. And that's the critical thing. You can get really excited about a whole bunch of things, but if you don't have the underlying data to tell you what you need, then it's going to be very difficult to nurture, and to be very difficult to have customized and personalized information presented to people. So smart questions on forms is a really good way to help clarify where people are at in the journey. And so progressive profiling can help, but think about very pointed questions that you can ask. And they maybe don't have to be so overt as to say, are you buying, when is your buying decision in the next 20, 30, 60 days or whatever it might be? That may be appropriate for what you need to do, but you can be more subtle in relation to what you're doing. Now, I suppose you also got to think about it's the buyer that we're generally trying to target, but you will have other people who will potentially come into the program or into your campaign. So it could be decision makers, users. A really interesting one is in the flight travel or travel industry. You've got someone who might own an organization or be a CEO. You've got an individual who does the booking, and then you've got someone who is the traveler. It's almost a little bit like the automotive industry. So they struggle. They have always struggled because the person who buys the car is not necessarily always the person who drives the car. And so from a messaging point of view, do you want to talk to the owner or do you want to talk to the buyer? Sorry, the driver. And that example. Think about fleet owners. You might have Jenny, who is a fleet manager at, let's say Coles supermarkets, and she has a fleet of 1,200 vehicles across the country, and 2,000 trucks, etc. And on the books, she looks like she's got a huge garage, right? But she's the fleet coordinator. She's not the driver, etc. But you've got all of those people driving, who are really the ones you're trying to communicate with. Another classic one is the difference in, from a university point of view, there's the prospective student, and of course, there's the parent. So, trying to be aware of these different audiences that you've got. And the easiest way for you to know who you're talking to is to ask the question. And the other one can be in financial services, investment areas. So, if is the person an advisor? Are they a mum and dad investor? If you know that information up front and it's kind of fundamental to how you're going to communicate with the person, then that's a really good example of a question you need to ask much earlier in your relationship with that person. So one of the purposes and of lead nurturing, another one is to foster ongoing engagement, okay, with the brand. And the more you know about the person, then you're in a better position to deliver more relevant content. Now it can be white papers, it can be industry webinars, it can be a whole slew of things there, to foster that ongoing engagement. Because what you're trying to do is get them to a point where their buying decision becomes a bit painful. They need to make a decision, and you want your brand to be the first brand that they think about when they get to the crunch and need to make a decision to either transact or purchase or subscribe or enroll, whatever the case may be. Okay. All right, so next thing we want to focus on is the actual experience that you're going to deliver. And this is really giving you a chance to tailor the customer experience based on what you know over time. Okay, it doesn't happen straight away, it happens over time. And one of the nice things you've got is the ability to accelerate people based on their engagement. Now, it may be you use the term hot lead, for example, pretty traditional type of language. So what constitutes a hot lead? Is a hot lead somebody, so let's take your nurture campaign, you've got 15 emails delivered over 12 months, and you've got people moving through. And some people will open everything, they'll click on everything, they'll download everything, etc. They'll watch the replays that you present and the video content that you deliver and all that kind of stuff, versus the individual who maybe opens every second or third email. Okay, they might click on a few things, etc. So the engagement is quite different. And so the first one, in most definitions, would probably be a hot lead, but that you can't base it purely on their engagement, right? So what you might have is, I had a good example. Thomson Reuters and similar organizations like Thomson, like LexisNexis and others, they provide amazing and phenomenal content to the legal industry. The other big consumer of their content, though, is university students. And both of those organizations are pretty generous with the university students. And so it became such a challenge with one of them, though. I recall we had to actually add a question in relation to profile. So like, who are you? Am I a barrister, a lawyer, a QC, or a KC now? Or are you a university student? And so it was pretty much because they still delivered the same sort of content, but if they knew they were a university student, they weren't trying to sell them the type of things that they would be looking to sell to law firms. Okay. That was just one way for them to be able to split that out and just tailor their comms a little bit more relevantly and in a more relevant manner, because those university students were opening everything, clicking everything, downloading everything, watching all the content. So you would think they're a hot lead, but no, they're not a hot lead. They're just studying at university. So progressive profile, using progressive profile in your forms is a great way to deliver these questions over time. And so if we go back to that point earlier with being able to talk with sales and agree the definition of a marketing qualified lead, well, those questions and the answers you need to them need to be built into your form, your multiple forms that you'll deliver over time to people, and use the progressive profiling to slowly deliver the content or the profile data that you need of that particular person. Now, you could also look at event attendance, downloads, overall engagement, lead scoring. All of these things can help you through that process as well. So some CX considerations to dive into. So we're looking very much at an Eloqua environment now and looking at a campaign canvas. So what qualifies a person to enter your lead nurture campaign? And so your thinking needs to shift probably to a segment where you're applying filters, and we'll do this shortly, have a look at that, to work out what are the filters that you need to apply that will qualify someone to come into the nurture campaign, and importantly, who should be excluded. Okay. Next one. So, what qualifies a person to exit the lead nurture campaign? There's all sorts of discussions on this one, right? So, you might have a campaign that runs for 12 months, there's 15 emails, and sort of 6 months in, Jenny from XYZ company becomes a customer. She's, the organization's purchased from you, they've made a decision, they've signed a contract, you've invoiced them, and they're now a happy customer. Do they continue through the lead nurture, or do you remove Jenny from the lead nurture campaign? Look, at the end of the day, it's kind of more a strategic question for you. From a technical point of view, simple. It's no drama. It can easily be achieved to remove somebody from the campaign. Simple. But it's more of a strategic question that you kind of need to think about. So, what impact does lead score change have on a person's campaign membership? So, as they're moving through the canvas, one of the queries we can make relates to their lead score. So, if their lead score is increasing, do you and have you set a threshold for what is a marketing qualified lead? So, if you're familiar with lead scoring, it could be that if they reach an A12, B12 scenario, then we take them from Eloqua and push them straight into the CRM platform and identify them as a marketing qualified lead. That could be one way to do it. It's one way. It's not the only way, but it's one way that you may do it. The definition of the hot lead is important. So you need to define what that is. I gave you an example just a moment ago as a university student or potentially a librarian at a law firm. Multiple ways to do that. And how are you going to notify sales? That's another important one. If it just sort of slips through the integration and rocks up in the lead area amongst hundreds of others potentially, how's it going to stand out? Okay, there are ways that we can help you make that stand out with some clever integration between Eloqua and most CRM platforms. All right, so the first party data, as we know, Google is about to, I think it was a headline the other day, I can't remember the number, but it was something like billions of points of data that Google will be deleting as of the 1st of July in relation to the shift from cookies to first party data. So hopefully you've got a first party data strategy in place. If you haven't, please give us a call. But this is just a generic down the left here, looking at the information that you might capture over time. So maybe the minimal data needed for them to actually get into the campaign is first name, last name, and email address. Maybe that's it. That's the baseline. Next time, as you deliver the second email, you may offer to invite them to do something. And your emphasis there is to capture job title and maybe their primary interest. And then you kind of repeat the process as you go through different campaigns. The blending of calls to action in your content, you can then present a list of key questions using forms, and you can do that delivered over time. So you may decide that there are sort of 10 key points of data that we need to capture. And what you may then select to do is only present 2 of those per engagement. And you can prioritize which is most important to you, or you can let Eloqua just randomize the delivery of those. Completely up to you as to how you go through it. But whatever you need in order to get a marketing qualified lead together, the minimal data or minimum data that you need, then we can use the form to help you do that automatically. You don't have to do it by yourself, or let the platform do the hard work for you. Using the progressive profile also means you can learn more about the buyer and think about the questions you're asking and how that funnels into your content. If we know that they're in a particular industry, or we know that they have a particular pain point in relation to their organization, do you have content that could potentially be presented to that person? Does that change the routing or the journey a little bit for that particular individual? Do you continue to nurture until purchase? Do you continue beyond the purchase? Again, more of a strategic question, and it's going to differ for everybody in relation to your products and services and what you do, but it is a valid question that should be explored. People will do all sorts of things. They want to research, they want to evaluate, and you have a chance to then influence them and potentially help them build a case study. Right? You can, a business case, not a case study, help build a business case for why your decision or your product or service is the right one. Then once you help them reach the decision, then you can support sales with all of that data that you've got available. So everything they've looked at, everything they've downloaded, etc., is going to help the sales team have a much richer conversation with the individual when that time comes. So lots of information that you can provide. And the emphasis, of course, there being on first-party data. So the question I wanted to throw at you then was, have you mapped your buyer's journey? And if you haven't, I'd argue that you're kind of walking a little bit in the dark in relation to what you're trying to do. The buyer's journey can be a really cool underlying foundation to what you're trying to do. In the context of today's conversation and lead nurturing campaigns, one of the key reasons I wanted to pose this question was in relation to that actual journey and how long it takes people to buy from you. Let me give you some examples. A first home buyer may well shop around for 12 plus months before they make a decision. So you need to think about a lead nurture campaign that kind of matches that process. You don't want to go hard and fast and deliver multiple emails in the first 2 months, and then they never hear from you again over the subsequent months. So once you know on average the buyer's journey within your industry, that really can be helpful. The example there also is, say, a property investor still looking in the property market, but a property investor, they may shop around for 2 months. That's it. They're not emotionally involved in the purchase decision. It's purely a financial transaction. Yep, they'll take the little three better in Burwood. Fantastic. I can get good rent return. Life is good. Okay, so very different type of buyer. So the earlier you know the type of buyer, the smarter you can be in your nurture that you're delivering. We talked about the high school student taking several years to decide. Think about a marketer, 35 years old, done uni, doing well at their job, but really wants to do an MBA. They may take 2 or 3 years to go through a process. They're working full time, obviously, and they may take 2 plus years to decide which MBA that they will do. Mum and dad investors, a very different type of buyer to an advisor, okay, within an organization, very different in the way they make a decision. And then to make a really clear example, if you're buying a pair of Levi's 501, you may take 30 minutes to choose your Levi's over your Wrangler. So that B2C, that consumer experience is typically far shorter decision-making process when compared to a more high value type of buying decision. So that mapping that buyer journey, this is something that we do for clients all the time through our strategic services team. You can contact us. You've got our details, but if you want to contact us, you can scan that QR code and we will reach out to you to have a chat about that. But it is a really helpful tool, not just in lead nurturing campaigns, but in many campaigns that you're looking at. So let's dive in and have a look at a campaign canvas. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea as to the mechanics of the campaign canvas. So that's not a nurture. That is the reminder campaign that sent you the emails. But fundamentally, from a campaign canvas point of view, really, you'll often have multiple entry points. And I find it a little bit easier to set them up as separate segments, which is also helpful from a reporting point of view. So you may have a functionality within the CRM where a CRM user can create a lead themselves within the platform, and you may have a box they can tick that says add to nurture, or you may have a campaign construct where they can take their lead and drop it into a campaign and have them automatically come into Eloqua. This is pretty simple, by the way. This is not tough stuff. And so having that as a separate segment is good from a reporting point of view, because then you can kind of do apples to apples comparisons in relation to where the leads came from. Other leads, you may have multiple forms and different things on the website. And so you may drop people into your nurture campaign as a result of them accessing other content. And so keeping in mind, you can have multiples here, okay? I like to use the contact washing machine just to make sure that first name is correct, as in its proper case, all that sort of stuff. And then we start to move into what the campaign might actually deliver and look at and the experience. Now, this is reasonably simple. All we're really doing is sending an email. We're waiting for a period of time. Did they open the email? Yes or no? If they didn't open it, I'm sending a repeat. That content is really identical. The only change will be the subject line because they didn't open the first one, right? So that's something to think about. Now, as you go through the campaign, and you'll notice when you pretty much, if I just highlight that area there, it just then becomes a repeat. Now, in this example, it's pretty simple. I've just added open, right? But you may want to start to increase the threshold for engagement and look not just simply at did they open, but did they click? And remember, what you're asking here with this particular element on the canvas is, did they click on anything in the email? It's not specific to a URL. If you want to get specific, then that's where you need to use a shared filter. So a shared filter, so if in the email, the primary call to action is to click here to access some sort of leadership, then you don't want to know if they just clicked generically. You want to know, did they click on that specific URL? And so then you can create a shared filter to ask that question. So you can be a little more specific as you move through. Now, if you wanted to start to understand a little bit more about the person, and maybe, industry is a key one. If we go back to Maria's question at the beginning, Maria had identified which business unit she wanted to push them into. And so we need to understand, I suppose, primary interest, not industry, but primary interest potentially as to which of those business units to push them into. So if we don't know that yet, what we can do is we can refer to the contact, and there is a standard field, everybody's got it, called primary interest, and you may or may not use it. But you can then select primary interest and determine, is it product A, product B, product C, yes or no. If we still don't have it, well, let's keep going through the campaign because it's a question we ask in our forms, etc. But there are all sorts of ways you can begin to interrogate as you move through the campaign canvas. Now, I've kind of finished it off there because I'm just trying to illustrate a point here, but the idea is that potentially would continue. Now, does it need to go up and down like mine does, or can it go left or right? You can go in whichever direction you want it to go. I find all clients do very different canvases in relation to the way they lay it out. As long as it makes sense to you, that's the main thing. Now, there's a whole range of other options you can play with very early in the campaign. You may want to understand if they've at least visited the website. At this point, you don't care what they looked at, just the fact that they're engaging and having a look. And so that's where visited website can come in handy. Okay. If you want to get specific, though, sorry, Maria, I'm going to keep going back to your example. So we go back to Maria's example with those 10 different business units. What she may want to do is create a range of shared filters with a whole bunch of URLs that address individual business units. So we can start to get some clarity around what they're actually looking at. And then we can begin to tailor the journey a little bit faster, a little bit further. This one we talked about speed and velocity. So that person that moves through the campaign in a much faster way. And so here you can see we send the first email, we then wait for 4 days. For that person, then we ask the question, did they open it, yes or no? If they did open it, at the end of 4 days, they go straight on to the second email. However, if they didn't, we then send them the repeat, and then we wait for another 4 days. Now, whether we wait 4 days, 3 days, 2 weeks, 2 months is all going to depend on your buyer's journey and typically the way people engage with you and how long it takes on average for them to make a buying decision. We want this to kind of somewhat parallel that time frame. Okay. So that's just one example of a simple nurture using some of the fundamentals of the platform to help you understand that a little bit better. So shared filters, I'm just looking at my little checklist here. We've got opens versus clicks. The evaluation period, this one's always a fun one to try and explain. What you can do is go straight from the email directly to the question here. So if I delete that one, and we can use the evaluation period. So the evaluation period, if I change it to say 4 days, so I said wait for 4 days. Here, what I'm doing is changing it. So the evaluation period is now 4 days. And have they done something within the last 4 days? How is this different to a wait step? Okay, so the difference to this is that as soon as that email is sent, obviously everybody drops down here and hits the element, did they open the email element? And then for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Eloqua is continually asking the question, did they open the email? It's a bit like a small child in the back of a car on a family holiday, right? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? It's just constantly. Did they open it? Did they open it? Did they open it? Now, as soon as Eloqua knows they opened it, then they will continue on the journey through the next step. However, at the end of the 4 days, the evaluation period, if at the end of that evaluation period, the answer is still no, then they will progress in this direction. So the evaluation period can be helpful if you're wanting to give people a little bit more control over how they hear from you and the frequency. If they're really engaging with your content, then you kind of want to strike while the iron's hot, right? Now, there are a whole range of other considerations you want to think about. Adding a wait step after this is sometimes a good idea, and maybe it's simply to wait for a day, or depending on the journey, you wait for 5 hours, whatever it might be. Because if they get this email, they come here, they open it straight away. There's every chance that within an hour, if I don't make any changes to this configuration, within an hour, they'll then receive the second email. And that may not be what you want. That can be resolved, but just be aware. Okay. Okay. So the next part is, where do I start? And we're almost finished. And well, the key point is, where do I start? Well, you start simply. And that's our encouragement to you. So starting simply is the best advice we can give you. And typically it's about focusing on a specific segment. Don't get bogged down in trying to nurture every conceivable heartbeat within your database. Start with probably, well, yeah, you can start in a whole range of places. But once you start simply, then you can start to measure. You can start to see what people are clicking on, what they're not responding to. Think of it almost like a sample size that you might want to play with. Okay, so choosing who goes into that sample size, that's a whole nother discussion. But if you can then start to slowly think about adding paths based on personas, can be a really good idea, because we can start to tailor the conversation a little bit further. And these things typically evolve over time. You obviously need to have a solid starting point for your nurture campaign, but think of it as a little bit of a fluid type of campaign, not a set and forget. That doesn't really work. What you really want to focus on is that initial audience and where to get started. So the start of the whole process needs to be thought through carefully. And you'll quickly discover that simply making a statement like, well, all new leads need to go into the lead nurture campaign doesn't quite cut it. Okay. So where would I start? I'd start with a target audience. And these are just some suggestions that you may want to think about. And these are possibly a little bit softer audiences to start with. So retired leads in the CRM. Maybe it's contacts that are in Eloqua, but not in the CRM. You'd be surprised for multiple reasons. You will find some, they will be there. The other consideration you've got to then think about is, if you've got a lead nurture campaign happening at the moment, what happens with people who are sort of making their way through that campaign? How do we transition them over to the new campaign? Do we just let them go through? You can do that. Do we lift them out completely and drop them into the new one? Again, that needs to be considered. Net new leads. So that one's pretty easy. So once you've got the new campaign up and running, and then you have a net new individual come into your system, then they're probably a good candidate to drop straight in. Active leads in the CRM, all of these different audiences. So these are just some suggestions as to where you might want to start. But what does starting simply actually look like? I thought this was hopefully a valid question. I would suggest to you it looks something like this. It's all net new leads or contacts from a particular or specific inquiry form. Maybe that's where you start. It's anyone that fills in that form and gives us answers to these questions, they go into the lead nurture. Remember, you can always add more later, but the objective here is to start simply. Maybe you focus on all people or contacts in a particular industry with a particular persona. They may be of a higher value to your organization, and you think there's a higher chance of them potentially engaging with the content. So maybe that's a good place to start. Another one, maybe you pick across different, all contacts in one of 4 different industries and X or Y. So that's getting a little bit more complex, not too complex, but a little bit more complex, but still reasonably simple in relation to what you're trying to do. Maybe it's all of the retired leads or the less engaged contacts. Again, it's kind of a soft audience. This is an audience that's not hyper engaged right now. So maybe we can use this as a partial re-engagement campaign and hopefully test things out a little bit. So what does it actually look like? So what I'm trying to do here is really just create a little bit of a visual to describe what the journey might look like. So think of this as the campaign canvas, essentially, and delivering different types of communications over time. But one of the key things I wanted to try and point out here is that it's often necessary, or there is benefit or value in shifting a person's campaign membership. Okay, that's what this is trying to show you. After email 4, you may present a question on a form, and one of the key questions you ask is around industry. So the person shares with you their industry and they submit that data. Now, because they've given you that information, it's pretty clear that if they were to, in fact, continue on to email 5 and 6 or 7, that content would be less relevant for that individual. So you can actually route them out of that campaign canvas and move them into a different campaign that is then far more targeted, or very specific content based on the information they provided you. So very easy to do, by the way, not hard, but it's something to be aware of, and as you're planning out your content strategy. Okay. All right. So I wanted to show you quickly something in segments, and we're a little bit over time here already. We kind of committed to doing 45 minutes this year, and this one is not a good example, but bear with me just for 1 second. So the key thing I really wanted to show here was how you can identify a net new addition. Okay. So when I create a segment in our instance of Eloqua, I come to segments. I generally will always start here with what I call our base segment. And the base segment has a bunch of exclusions, and that's the exclusions here. One thing, I just had a conversation the other day with a client where they were needing to exclude all of these types of email accounts. Now, for some of you, you'll want to talk to people with a Gmail account, but for others, you don't. You want to talk to people who have a work-oriented email address. And so this is just a filter we've put together, which has grown over time, to exclude as many of those web-based email platforms that we possibly can. So they're excluded. But the one I wanted to show you is the date created. Okay, so if you select date created, this is the date the contact was created in Eloqua. There's a system field, you all have it, and you've got some options to play with. And the one that I would want to play with here is within the last. And I'm going to say, let's say within the last, let's say 2 days. Okay. And this may well be the very beginning of a group of people that you want to then put into your campaign. Now, as you know, there you go, there are 4 contacts. So we've had 4, actually, we've had 5. So somebody's excluded. I would imagine the excluded is probably a Gmail account of some sort. We get those from time to time. So with those 4 people, we have 4 people in our database as of within the last 2 days who are brand new to us. And so then you might want to add additional filters potentially. But, and you can see I've got a whole bunch of exclusions, as I said, built in here anyway. And then that person will, or those 4 people could make their way directly into your lead nurture. That's just one entry point that you could potentially use. The last section is looking at test and improve. And I was going to take you into insight, but I just don't think we're going to have time to do that today. So maybe we can park that for another session. But the key thing I wanted to try and get across here in this area is to make sure that we're always you're measuring the performance of your assets. You've got mountains of information and data sitting in Insight that can tell you a whole range of things. The challenge is getting to that data and understanding what it is you're actually looking at. Okay. The constant refinement is critical, and you want to be setting up. There are a couple of ways you can do it, right? You can go in on a regular basis and access the reports and pull them down and end up with, this library of Excel files potentially that you're looking at over time. Yeah, look, that can be helpful, and it does certainly offer you some insight. But and it does help you measure. You certainly want to try and get some sort of a baseline of performance. So when someone says, "Is the campaign performing well?" How do you answer the question? Based on what? Is it just marketing qualified leads, or is it engagement with our assets that we're sending? What is it? What's the measurement of success? The other way you can do it is to create some dashboards in Insight. And we've done this for a number of clients where they've got their primary lead nurture campaign or campaigns in place, and that constant accessing of reports and extracting them and et cetera just becomes cumbersome. So what they've done, or what we've helped them do, is to build out a range of Insight dashboards that are quite campaign specific. And that's so much more helpful. And there's some really cool ways that things can be displayed in Insight as well to help give you that information that you need. So if that's something you'd like to explore, please, again, reach out to us. We can help you with that. I'll show you some examples of what that might look like. And again, it just saves you having to constantly go in and look at the insight reports and extract them. You can just go straight to a dashboard within Eloqua and you're all set. Okay. So I won't take you into Insight, but I did have some screenshots for you of Redwood. So this is the changes coming to Insight over the next month or so. It's running a little bit behind, I understand, but it's on its way. And essentially, the change is largely cosmetic with Redwood. So the fundamental way the platform works isn't changing from what we understand. It's just basically cosmetic changes. So that's that one. All right. So next month, based on voting from subscribers earlier this year, was to look at programs and landing pages. They're kind of the next two in priority. We'll work out how we're going to present those two in one session or how we'll do that. And we may start off next month with a little bit on Insight for you to catch up. But happy to stay on the line for a few minutes. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask those questions and I'll stay on the line. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next month. You'll receive an invite from us. And thank you again for joining us. And sorry we went over time a little bit. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.